In today's video, we cover 3 of the most unusual true crime cases to come out of the UK, with each case chosen due to the unusual crime itself or the unusual circumstances surrounding the crime. But before we move on to said crimes, if you would rather be watching true crime than doing anything else, you're in the right place and you're going to fit in well. And if you love true crime tales and haven't already done so, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. I really would appreciate it. Now, let's get ready because it's time for more true crime. On a cold Sunday evening on November 28th, 2004, in the tranquil seaside town of Nairn, Veronica Wilson opened her front door to an unexpected visitor. The man standing outside was a stranger clad in a baseball cap and dark clothes, asking for her husband by name. Veronica fetched her husband, Alistair Wilson, who came downstairs curious and unalarmed. At the door, the stranger silently handed Alistair a folded blue envelope with the name Paul scrawled on it. Perplexed, Alistair stepped inside momentarily to examine the envelope. It was empty. He then walked back to the visitor to ask what this meant. At that moment, the man raised a small pistol and shot Alistair multiple times at point-blank range, then fled off into the night. Veronica, hearing the noise, rushed to the doorway to find her husband bleeding on the doorstep. It was a scene of pure horror. The children were upstairs in bed, and a killer had just vanished into the darkness without a word. Alistair Wilson died of his injuries a short time later at the local hospital, leaving behind a stunned family and a mystery that would haunt the Highlands for years. The murder of Alistair Wilson had no obvious reason. He was a well-liked 30-year-old bank manager with no known enemies or illicit ties. The senselessness of the crime, an ordinary man executed on his own doorstep, rattled the community and baffled police. Investigators launched one of the largest manhunts ever seen in Scotland, combing through Alistair's personal and professional life for clues. Early on, police recovered the oddest piece of evidence, the murder weapon, finding it hidden inside a rainwater drain on the street. It was an antique Hainel Schmeiser pocket pistol from the 1920s, something you'd expect to see in a museum or a World War II collection, not in a modern homicide. The discovery of this rare gun deepened the intrigue. Had the killer chosen it for its diminutive size or untraceability, or was it simply the weapon available to them? Despite extensive forensic testing, the gun yielded no DNA hits. The blue envelope marked Paul was equally confounding. Alistair had no close friends or associates by that name, leaving everyone wondering if Paul was a red herring or a critical clue. As the investigation stretched on, Police Scotland refused to let the case go cold. Over the years, they tried innovative tactics, mass DNA screenings of local men, international tracing of the pistol's origins, and numerous public appeals. But the gunman remained a phantom. Neighbours and witnesses had only a scant description. A man about 5'7", seen briefly in the glow of a porch light, giving police very little to go on. A breakthrough finally came, not through forensics, but through old-fashioned sleuthing and reconsideration of motive. In 2022, nearly 18 years after the murder, detectives uncovered a possible reason Alistair might have been targeted. Just 3 days before he was killed, Alistair had filed a complaint to stop a noisy decking construction at a pub across the street. It was a small-town dispute, the kind of thing that normally ends in harsh words, not violence. But police learned that Alistair's objection had become the talk of the town that weekend. Could it be that someone connected to the pub, perhaps a patron or a worker irate over the halted project, decided to silence the man who interfered? This theory gained traction as investigators found out about conversations about that guy Wilson who opposed the deck were happening in the pub's bar just 48 hours before the shooting. With a motive finally emerging, police narrowed their focus. In July 2023, a dramatic development was announced. They now believe 2 people carried out the hit on Alistair Wilson, and that one of them, a local individual with a criminal past, has been identified as a suspect. This person, rumoured to have a history of drug offences, fits into the social circle that might overlap with the pub dispute. The authorities have not publicly named him, but behind the scenes they are likely gathering the last pieces of evidence needed to make an arrest. Nearly 2 decades of dogged police work and community perseverance may at last be paying off. To this day, no one has been charged with Alistair Wilson's murder, and thus no trial or sentencing has occurred. The case remains officially unsolved, a rarity in Scotland for a crime so high profile. However, the Wilson family and Nairn community hold out hope that justice is imminent. Detectives had made it clear that they're closer than ever to cracking the case, and that they won't stop until the doorstep killer and any accomplices faces the courts. On the night of May 6, 2005, 2 teenage girls in Reading set out for what they thought would be a fun evening. Mary Ann Lenihan, 16, and her 18-year-old friend, whose name has been withheld for protection, were typical teenagers. They liked music, hanging out, and on this night they'd borrowed a friend's car to cruise around. Little did they know that as darkness fell, they had become the targets of a deadly vendetta. Around 10:30 p.m, as the girls waited in a parked Renault Clio near a derelict pub, a gang of men ambushed them. In an instant, knives were at their throats. 6 men, some of whom the girls recognised from the neighbourhood, dragged Mary Ann and her friend out of the car. Leading them was Adrian Reds Thomas, a 24-year-old man simmering with rage. Weeks earlier, Thomas had been robbed and stabbed in a drug house, and he blamed Mary Ann and her friend, believing they had tipped off his attackers. Now he sought revenge. With him were 5 cohorts from South London: Michael Johnson, Jamil Morley, Joshua Morley, Indrit Krasniki, and Llewellyn Adams, their ages ranging from 18 to 23, all with troubled, violent backgrounds. The girls were kidnapped at knife point and thrust into the trunk of the gang's car. Terrified and unsure if they'd survive the next hour, Mary Ann and her friend held onto each other in the darkness of the boot. The car stopped at the Abbey House Hotel, where the gang had decided to continue their assault out of public view. In a calculated move, 2 of the men checked into a room, while the others smuggled the bound teenagers in through a back door. Thus began a prolonged ordeal of torture that would stretch into the early morning hours. Inside room 19 of the Abbey House, the men unleashed all their pent-up fury. Mary Ann and her friend were beaten mercilessly, repeatedly by different attackers, and scalded with boiling water from a kettle. They were forced to take drugs. Their own cell phones were used to taunt and lure others in an attempt to settle scores. And all the while, the gang told them they wouldn't live to see daylight. The sheer brutality is difficult to even describe. It was a scene of pure sadism, as later detailed in court. Yet, in their minds, Thomas and his accomplices were exacting justice for the slight they believed Mary Ann had caused them. Hours went by in that room, filled with cries of pain, threats, and violence. By roughly 3 or 4 a.m. on May 7, 2005, the gang decided to finish what they had started. Mary Ann and her friend, battered and half conscious, were hauled back into the car. They were driven to Prospect Park, a public park shrouded in pre-dawn darkness. The men marched the girls to a quiet spot under some trees. What happened next was the stuff of nightmares. They pinned Mary Ann down and began stabbing her over and over with a knife. Mary Ann tried to fight, but she was exhausted and outnumbered. She suffered approximately 40 stab wounds to her arms, torso, and neck. At some point, her young body simply couldn't continue the fight, falling unconscious in an attempt to numb the pain. Her friend was stabbed as well. Then, Jamil Morley took out an adapted handgun, essentially an air pistol that could fire real ammo, and shot the 18-year-old friend in the head. The bullet entered her skull and she went limp, appearing dead. Satisfied that both victims were taken care of, the 6 men left them in the cold grass and fled. But in the eerie silence after the attackers disappeared, Mary Ann's friend miraculously regained consciousness. She had a splitting headache, blood in her eyes, and her best friend lying next to her making faint rasps. Summoning strength, few could imagine, she stumbled out of the park in search of help. At 5:30 a.m, a passing driver spotted this bloodied barefoot girl weaving frantically, truly a survivor of a living hell, and called emergency services. The police arrived to a harrowing scene. A teenage girl with a gunshot wound, hysterical and weeping, and further into the park, the lifeless body of Mary Ann Lenihan, still warm. Seasoned detectives were shaken by the cruelty of the crime. However, the surviving victim, despite being severely injured, provided key information right away. She named Red's Adrian Thomas and others as her attackers and revealed the motive of revenge behind the night's events. What followed was one of the fastest and most effective manhunts in recent memory. In less than 2 weeks, all 6 perpetrators were identified, located and arrested. Thomas was caught in Birmingham, trying to hide out. Johnson turned himself in once he realised the game was up. The Morley brothers, Krasniqi and Adams, were rounded up around London. Public outrage was palpable. This was a crime that felt medieval in its barbarity, committed in modern England. The trial that took place in January 2006 riveted the nation. Details of Mary Ann's last hours were recounted in excruciating detail. The surviving girl testified behind a screen, describing how the men laughed as they tortured them and how Mary Ann begged for their lives. The defendants showed little remorse, sometimes even trying to shift blame onto one another. Halfway through the trial, Michael Johnson suddenly confessed, acknowledging that he was Mary Ann's executioner, stabbing her when Adrian Thomas couldn't bring himself to do it. Perhaps even in that gang of monsters, the reality of stabbing a 16-year-old to death had given one of them pause. But tragically, it only led another to step up and commit the act. In March 2006, a jury found every one of the 6 men guilty on nearly all counts. The judge did not mince words during sentencing a month later. He effectively told the convicts that they would likely die in prison, serving life sentences with decades before any possibility of release. Adrian Thomas, Jamil Morley, Joshua Morley and Michael Johnson were all sentenced to a minimum term of 27 years in prison, whilst Llewellyn Adams and Indrit Krasniqi were sentenced to a minimum term of 23 years. Outside the court, Mary Ann's family expressed relief that justice was served, but also anguish. Mary Ann was gone forever, a young life brutally snuffed out. By all outward appearances, Adele Rennie was an ordinary woman, a nurse entrusted with caring for patients in a Scottish hospital. But lurking behind her mild-mannered facade was one of the most compulsive and manipulative cyberstalkers the UK has ever seen. Adele's story is not one of violent crime or bloodshed, rather it's a chilling saga of deception, obsession and betrayal carried out in the digital realm. A true crime tale of a catfish who just wouldn't quit. Rennie's descent into infamy began around 2012, when she was in her mid-20s. She discovered a dark thrill in pretending to be someone she wasn't. Hiding behind fake profiles of attractive men, Adele would lure women into online relationships. She spun elaborate lies, posing as a charming doctor at her own hospital, or as a military man overseas, whatever persona might captivate her target. Using a voice-changing app, she deepened her voice on phone calls, making her victims believe they were truly talking to a man. She became a puppet master of emotions. Once she had the women hooked, she'd often cajole or coerce them into sending intimate photos. Then came the threats. If a victim showed hesitation or tried to cut ties, Adele, masquerading as the scorned boyfriend, would threaten to expose those photos or reveal sensitive secrets. These women were terrified. They had no idea that the person tormenting them was in fact another woman, someone many of them had met in person at the hospital, as Adele herself, not knowing she was the same man behind the screen. The psychological damage inflicted was severe. One victim had been a patient's granddaughter, meaning Rennie used her position as a nurse to get close to the family and then later preyed on the young woman. She exploited trust in a way most could never imagine. It wasn't until 2017 that the law caught up with Adele Rennie. A police investigation, sparked by a victim's complaint, unravelled her web of lies. In court, the details were so bizarre that even the judge was nearly speechless. Adele pleaded guilty, and the sheriff made an example of her. Nearly 2 years in prison and a spot on the sex offenders list, an unusual designation for a case without physical sexual assault, but fitting given her tactics. As she went off to serve her sentence, many thought that would be the end of the story. A troubled woman punished and presumably rehabilitated. Yet, just a short time after her release, Adele struck again. By 2019, she had concocted a new false identity, this time as Dan, a handsome lawyer on Tinder. It was as if she couldn't stop herself. The compulsion to deceive and control was too strong. She targeted new women, using even bolder strategies, showing that she knew their routines, where they shopped, where they hung out, to instill fear. One woman received a video from Dan that was taken in a park where she had been jogging, with the implication, "I was there, watching you." This high-tech stalking was deeply traumatizing for the victim, who felt hunted by a phantom. When police realized that the spectre haunting these women was Adele Rennie, again she was arrested and hauled back to court. The judge, the same one as before, could hardly contain astonishment that Rennie, fresh out of prison, had resumed her schemes, handed her a stiffer sentence, 3 years behind bars. By now, Adele Rennie's name was making headlines across the UK as one of the most prolific female catfish scammers ever documented. For most people, a second prison term might have been the wake-up call needed to stop for good, but not for Adele. Fast forward to 2023, Rennie is just out of prison again, ostensibly under supervision and strict conditions. Yet, within months, she's back on dating apps, prowling for a new target. This time, she becomes a male pharmacist, matching with a woman who had no inkling that the caring, attentive man she met online was actually the same Adele Rennie who'd been on the news. Over several weeks, Rennie's behaviour followed a now familiar pattern. Intense romance and compliments one moment, then unsettling displays of omnipresence the next, like sending the woman photos of her own front door. The victim felt eyes on her everywhere. It was only when the woman confided in someone or remembered a news story about a catfishing nurse that the pieces clicked. She might be dating Adele Rennie in disguise. Police were notified, and in a raid they literally caught Adele with the digital evidence in hand. The fake profiles, the voice apps, all of it on her device. In November 2023, Adele Rennie was arrested for the third time in 6 years, an almost unheard of reoccurrence for this type of crime. In the summer of 2024, Adele stood before a judge once more, pleading guilty to her latest offences. By now, 33 years old, she had spent much of her early 30s in prison and was poised to spend even more of her late 30s there too. The judge, Sheriff Nicola Patrick, delivered a scathing rebuke, highlighting how Adele had planned her deception with premeditation and caused real trauma to her victims. This wasn't some prank or momentary lapse, it was targeted emotional abuse. The sentence reflected society's condemnation, 28 months in prison, and laid on top of that were orders to strictly control her life once free. For 5 years after release, Adele Rennie won't be able to just hop onto social media or dating sites. Any internet-capable device she uses will be known to authorities, and any attempt to hide her identity could land her back in court. She's also forbidden from contacting her most recent victim, or any past victims for that matter, under non-harassment orders. And, importantly, she's on the sex offenders register until the 2030s, a constant reminder of her wrongdoing that will follow her long after the headlines fade. So there we have it, 3 of the most unusual cases I could find from the annals of UK crime. And if you took something from this video, you might also like to watch the video on screen now, where I cover the case of the gorilla masked monster who terrorised the female students of Birmingham University for months, attacking them after dark before the police caught up with him and locked him away for good. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, when it will once again be time for more true crime.